Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 11 tight end and quarterback rankings for the 2023 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, I'm covering all topics related to those two positions, beginning with matchups, talking about which defenses are allowing the most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends and quarterbacks so that we can identify the most advantageous matchups going into Week 11. After which, I'll transition into talking about my top 16 rankings at both positions, sharing with you guys my thought process and opinions on each individual player, while also presenting statistics in order to justify those overall rankings. If you're looking for a specific player, there are timestamps down in the description of the video. While you're down there, of course, subscribe to the channel. We're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2023 season. Tomorrow, we'll have a rest of season rankings video for quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight ends. Saturday afternoon, the live stream begins at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Sunday morning live stream begins at 7 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Be sure to swing on by. Thank you very much. Okay, let's talk about the tight end position. As you guys can see in regards to matchups, I've isolated the statistics from weeks 5 through 10, and this is the most advantageous matchups going into the week. The Los Angeles Chargers, since week 5, are allowing 15.36 half PPR fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, followed by the New Orleans Saints, Houston Texans, Washington Commanders, Los Angeles Rams. Of course, we want to take advantage of those overall matchups. Now, I'll refer back to these statistics over the course of today's episode, but some of the more disadvantageous matchups going into the given week, like the Cleveland Browns, who again haven't played against many elite tight ends, and their great defense continues to churn out great performances against them. They haven't allowed very many points to opposing tight ends. The Kansas City Chiefs, another one of these great defenses. As we all know, Dallas Goedert won't be participating in that game, so we really don't have to worry about that situation. But either way, I just wanted to go ahead and give you guys an understanding as to between weeks 5 through 10, which defenses are allowing the most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Now that we've covered that, I'll transition into talking about my top 16 tight end rankings. A reminder, between now and Sunday morning's live stream, rankings are subject to change. So if you're trying to stay up to date on my latest rankings, be sure to travel down to the description of the video and check out Underdog Fantasy. At this current moment in time, if you sign up using code Andrew and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only are you going to get the first-time deposit match up to $100, but you'll get my rankings sent to you from my email directly to yours every single Sunday morning. These are rankings that are by position, by tier, flex rankings, half PPR, full PPR, all-encompassing rankings. All you got to do is make sure that you're eligible, of course, based on the location on the right side of the screen. Check that out. Of course, sign up today using code Andrew. I greatly appreciate all the support. And if, in fact, you go ahead and sign up before tonight's game, you'll be able to take advantage of the new customer special of Joe Burrow, 0.5 total yards. Thank you very much. Okay, let's talk about the tight end position. Of course, Travis Kelce is in the Kelce tier. There's no one else that'll pretty much join him in this overall conversation. And there's a reason why I've pretty much named the tier after him, because he is at the top of this conversation. They take on the Philadelphia Eagles. It doesn't really matter who he takes on. We are starting him every single game. There's no other explanation needed. Moving on to our number 2, we have TJ Hockenson, who's coming off of an unbelievably, dominant performance. 15 targets, the most targets that a tight end has gotten thus far this season. 11 receptions, 134, and a touchdown. Over the course of the last 2 games with Josh Dobbs, TJ Hockenson has had a 41% target share within this offense. 26 targets in the last 2 games, a ridiculous number. And the final game that we saw Joshua Dobbs participate in with the Arizona Cardinals a couple weeks back, Trey McBride had himself 14 targets. So he continues to look towards his tight ends. That is where he's found his comfortability. And this upcoming week, they take on the Denver Broncos, the 8th best matchup at the position. They're allowing over 12.5 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. And considering this offense has targeted TJ Hockenson 8+ times in 14 of the last 15 games he has played for the Minnesota Vikings, of course, we're anticipating another big performance here. And if, in fact, Justin Jefferson does not play, it only elevates TJ Hawkinson's potential. Moving on to our number 3, we have Mark Andrews. He plays later today. Mark Andrews, earlier this season against the Cincinnati Bengals, week 2. 8 targets, 5 catches, 45 receiving yards, and a touchdown, 13 fantasy points. Of course, he missed week 1, dealing with an injury. He was still questionable to play in week 2, yet he still had himself a fantastic performance. But even if you go back to the 2022 season against this defense, the most recent games, he's consisted of 18.9 fantasy points and 9.8 fantasy points. 8 catches, 89 and a touchdown, 5 catches for 73. He's done a lot of damage against this defense, and so have a lot of other tight ends as of late. Since week 5, the Cincinnati Bengals are allowing 12.18 fantasy points per game. They're the 9th best matchup at the position. I'm expecting big things tonight from Mark Andrews. Moving on to our number 4, we have Dalton Kincaid. He continues to play well. This is 4 consecutive games of over 11 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. That would be 15 plus fantasy points in a full PPR scoring format. He continues to dominate in the absence of Dawson Knox. As of late, he's been able to garner a 22% target share, averaging a total of 8 targets per game. They take on the New York Jets. Hopefully the change of the offensive coordinator isn't going to, diminish the overall opportunity for Dalton Kincaid. Hopefully it'll just continue to accentuate him as a part of this offense and the number 2 receiving option outside of Stephon Diggs. Moving on to our number 5, we have another rookie tight end who's obviously dominating, Sam LaPorta. Unfortunately, last week, the receiving touchdown on a little bit of a play-action play went to the backup tight end, Brock Wright. If it had gone to Sam LaPorta, we had no complaints last week. We'd have been very happy. Unfortunately, only came away with 6 fantasy points despite being my number 1 tight end on the week. I was expecting that game to be a high-scoring game back and forth. The fact that Sam LaPorta really didn't get much of a workload, only 5 targets, 4 catches, and 40 receiving yards, was quite underwhelming. This week, they take on the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears have played extremely well in terms of stopping the run. If that forces Jared Goff to throw the ball for the majority of the game, if that takes place, again, the Bears are allowing the 11th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends, nearly 11.5 per game. We're hoping for upside here from Sam LaPorta. Moving on to our number 6, we have George Kittle. Just look at the overall routes in which he was targeted on. Only had 4 targets, 3 receptions, but a big play down the field, which got him that total of 116 receiving yards and the receiving touchdown. George Kittle is a part of such an elite offense that anyone can score in any given week. The fact that Deebo Samuel had a rushing touchdown, Kyle Juszczyk has a rushing touchdown last week, just kind of speaks to the kind of volatility within this offense. If everyone can score within a singular week, there's also going to be weeks in which, if Christian McCaffrey can go on a 17-game streak of scoring a touchdown, then all of a sudden it ends. There's always the potential in which George Kittle could be the odd man out. But this week, they take on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's the 7th best matchup at the position. They're allowing over 12.5 fantasy points per game. My hope is that George Kittle delivers another promising performance in Week 11. Moving on to our number 7, we have Trey McBride. The second-year tight end was a dominant force in Week 10. He had a 28% target share, 9 targets, 8 receptions, 113 receiving yards, 17.1 fantasy points. And now he has the privilege of taking on the Houston Texans defense that has allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing tight ends since Week 5, 14.14 fantasy points per game. The Arizona Cardinals are still trying to get Kyler Murray comfortable within this offense. You got to remember, in comparison to last year, this is a new head coach, this is a new regime, this is a new offensive coordinator. So he's still trying to kind of find his footing within this offense. And once he does, he'll continue to look in the direction of Trey McBride, who has an advantageous matchup, to say the very least, this week. Moving on to our number 8 to begin the C tier. A tight end that over the course of the last 3 games has scored a touchdown in every single contest. Of course, Dak Prescott has been playing extremely well, and the Dallas Cowboys are blowing out every single team, so why not this week? They take on the Carolina Panthers. There is a chance that Jake Ferguson can continue his streak of scoring a receiving touchdown to 4 games. Thus far this season, Jake Ferguson leads the entire National Football League in terms of total targets in the red zone, whether it's just in the red zone alone or even inside the 10-yard line. As long as that opportunity continues to go in his direction, of course, he has consistent upside at the tight end position, especially considering touchdowns or the make or break factor as to whether or not you're in that top 12 conversation. Moving on to our number 9, we have Dalton Schultz, who's been playing extremely well as of late. Since Week 4, Dalton Schultz is the number 4 overall tight end in fantasy points per game on average, averaging 12.4 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. As long as we're going to be in a situation this week taking on the Arizona Cardinals in which they're throwing the ball heavily, we're going to be in a great spot. CJ Stroud has had 39 plus passing attempts in each of the last 2 games, so hopefully he'll continue to look in the direction of Dalton Schultz. We know that Noah Brown, 2 consecutive days, has not practiced, so if there's going to be less targets for another receiving option, that continues to give opportunity for Dalton Schultz within this offense. Moving on to our number 10, we have Kmet. When I go ahead and compare him to the remaining tight ends that I haven't mentioned, he really does have some of the highest potential for upside, especially when we're talking about scoring touchdowns. In the last 3 games that he has played with Tyson Bagent, he has scored 12.9, 20.5, and 7.1, has gotten himself a steady stream of overall targets. Now, in the last 2 games with Justin Fields, prior to Justin Fields' injury against the Minnesota Vikings a couple weeks back, he scored 24.1 and 12.7. He has been a fantastic tight end thus far this season. He's got himself 25 targets in the last 3 games. As long as that opportunity stream continues, even in the return of Justin Fields, of course, he should be a fantastic play within the week. Moving on to our number 11, to begin the D tier, we have Evan Engram. Evan Engram is a solid player. He's had 8 consecutive games of 7 or more targets. But the thing is, he does not score touchdowns. This week, he takes on the Tennessee Titans. The last time he took on the Tennessee Titans back in 2022, it was an infamous game in which he scored 33.7 fantasy points. If you guys remember that overall contest, it was 11 catches, 162, I think it was 2 touchdowns or 3 touchdowns, a monster performance to say the very least. It was like a top 10 overall performance at the tight end position in the last 20 years. Maybe this week Trevor Lawrence wants to play a little bit better. Hopefully he does. And if in fact he does so, he'll get the targets, he'll get the receptions, and Evan Engram should be a solid play as our number 11. Moving on to our number 12, we have Tyler Conklin. Over the course of the last 2 games, Tyler Conklin, 13 targets, 13 catches. And even though that has been the case, and he's been pretty much the number 2 receiving option within this offense, he's only been able to garner himself a 15% target share. Of course, a lot of the opportunity is going in the direction of Garrett Wilson, but the safety blanket for Zach Wilson has consistently been Tyler Conklin over the course of the season. So going into this week's matchup against the Buffalo Bills, who are allowing the 12th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, over 11 fantasy points per game and a half PPR since week 5, we're hoping that the continuation of Tyler Conklin being the number 2 receiving option within this offense is going to stay consistent. Moving on to our number 13, we have David Njoku. David Njoku, has seen himself a lot of target share as of late. 9, 6, 8, and 9 are the targets he has seen in the last 4 games. As long as they continue to have a concerted effort to get David Njoku the ball, the replacement of Deshaun Watson is absolutely going to impact David Njoku's potential upside. We're going to have to wait and see what Dorian Thompson-Robinson, DTR, is going to be able to accomplish this upcoming weekend against the Pittsburgh Steelers. But I'm hoping that, David Njoku continues to maintain a huge role within this offense, because if in fact he does, of course, could be a security blanket for the young rookie quarterback, of course, filling in for Deshaun Watson for the remainder of the year. Moving on to our number 14, to close out the D tier, we have Logan Thomas. Logan Thomas, 4+ receptions in each of the last 4 games. The last time that he took on the New York Giants, who he has a privilege of taking on this week, he had himself 6 targets, 4 catches, 51, 7.1 fantasy points. Last week, had himself 5 catches, 40 yards, and 6.5 fantasy points. He's a middle of the pack tight end. If he scores a touchdown, fantastic. He has the opportunity to do so, but it's not as frequent as some of these other options that we've already named over the course of today's episode. Moving on to our number 15, we have Luke Musgrave. Luke Musgrave, as of late, of course, has had himself a couple opportunities here and there, has scored a touchdown most recently against the Los Angeles Rams. Last week had himself 2 catches for 62 yards. He has the most advantageous matchup going into the week, taking on the Chargers, who are allowing over 15 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. If this is going to be a negative game script, that should mean pass heavy in the second half. And hopefully, as long as Luke Musgrave is on the field seeing opportunity, considering he's played 70+% of the offensive snaps in each of the last 3 games, hopefully he can have himself an upside performance. We're going to have to wait and see. I don't trust Jordan Love enough, but there's always a chance. The final tight end I wanted to mention is Michael Mayer, another one of these rookie tight ends. Again, 4 rookie tight ends in the conversation of our top 16. This is going to be a situation where I'm expecting the Las Vegas Raiders to probably be trailing for majority of this game. And if in fact they are, they'll be throwing for majority of the contest. And hopefully Michael Mayer will have the touchdown upside and potential red zone target share similar to the way that he had it last week going forward. Okay, let's talk about the quarterback conversation in regards to matchups. As you guys can see to the right side of the screen, since week 5, the Washington Commanders have allowed the most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks in terms of passing statistics isolated. That's passing yards, passing touchdowns, passing interceptions. To be exact, that's 1 point for every 25 passing yards, 4 points per every passing touchdown, and -2 points for every interception. So, of course, we want to take advantage of the idea that the Washington Commanders are an advantageous matchup, but unfortunately, Tommy DeVito plays against them. We're not starting him unless you're in a desperate situation in a super flex 2 QB league. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, an advantageous matchup, of course. That should bode very well for someone like Brock Purdy this week. The Philadelphia Eagles, they've given up their fair share of points. Good luck. Patrick Mahomes is going to go ahead and tear them apart. The Houston Texans have given up their fair share of points. Kyler Murray hopefully will have himself another big week here. Either way, just wanted to talk about some of the more advantageous matchups. I'll refer back to the statistics over the course of the game. But some of the more disadvantageous matchups. Quarterbacks taking on the Jets. Good luck to Josh Allen this week. Last time he saw that defense, didn't play well. I think he was the number 20 overall ranked quarterback in week 1, considering the 4 turnovers against that team within the game. The Las Vegas Raiders have played relatively well against opposing quarterbacks, forced a lot of turnovers as of late. Can Tua Tagovailoa go ahead and break the mold in that overall situation? Time will tell. Now that this is all covered, let's go ahead and let's talk about my top 16 quarterback rankings, beginning with Patrick Mahomes, who I mentioned just moments ago, takes on the Philadelphia Eagles. Again, allowing 18.36 fantasy points per game. They're the 3rd best matchup. We know that earlier this season, the Washington Commanders took on this defense and they pushed them to the limit in both overall games. Eric Bieniemy is the current offensive coordinator of the Washington Commanders, the former offensive coordinator of the Kansas City Chiefs for the last couple seasons. Of course, they run a very similar offense in which the Kansas City Chiefs do, with Sam Howell in week 8, putting up 397 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns, and 31 fantasy points against the Philadelphia Eagles defense. I'm expecting Patrick Mahomes Andy Reid to dominate against his defense this week. Moving on to our number 2. On the other end of this overall conversation and this matchup, we have Jalen Hurts taking on the Kansas City Chiefs. Again, the last time these two teams faced in the Super Bowl, Jalen Hurts had himself a very impressive game of 300 passing yards, a passing touchdown, but also 15 rushing attempts for 70 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, and 41.16 fantasy points. I don't know if we're going to be able to get a performance such as that once again, but as of late, Jalen Hurts is playing the best football that he has all season long. From week 7 through 9, he has had a 75% passing completion percentage. He has 10 total touchdowns throughout those 3 games and has put up a total of 23.26, 27.36, and 25.88 fantasy points in those 3 individual games. Of course, we're firing them up once again. Moving on to the final quarterback in the S tier, that is correct. We are going to include Dak Prescott into this overall conversation, considering how well he has played as of late. Since week 6, Dak Prescott has had a 72% passing completion percentage, and his performances have consisted of 24.88, 28.06, 28.36, and 37.86. He's coming off a performance of 400 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns, and a rushing touchdown. Nearly 38 fantasy points against the New York Giants. So why not the possibility once again this week of imposing your will against the Carolina Panthers defense that has not played well all season long? With Dak Prescott totaling 14 overall touchdowns in the last 4 games, I'm expecting another big performance out of him this week. Moving on to the A tier, we begin with Tua Tagovailoa. Tua Tagovailoa, in the last 4 games he has played, again, he plays at home this week against the Las Vegas Raiders. In the last 4 games he has played at home, he has 12 passing touchdowns, 3 per game on average. They continue to play significantly better at home. This is going to be a boat race, which I expect with Devon Achane back within this offense to really be difficult to stop this offense. They're going to be able to run the ball at will, and with that, open up play action, a lot of RPO opportunities, and no one can truly cover a Tyreek Hill, which is only going to make it that much easier for guys like Jalen Waddle to get open. I expect the Las Vegas Raiders to be trailing for majority of this game. We just got to hope that Tua Tagovailoa not only just scores early, but scores often and continues to pour it on against this Las Vegas Raiders defense. Moving on to our number 5, Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert had himself an incredible game. If it wasn't for the fact that that defense of the Los Angeles Chargers couldn't stop a soul, they could have very easily won that game. Nonetheless, with an injured Keenan Allen, was able to have himself 323 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns, over 28 fantasy points. Obviously, the injury of Keenan Allen is something that we have to keep in mind going into this week against the Green Bay Packers. Again, this Packers secondary is in shambles. Not only are they dealing with injuries, they've most recently traded away one of their starting cornerbacks. So going into this week, if he has Keenan Allen available to him, taking on the Green Bay Packers, such an advantageous matchup, I'm expecting a lot of things from Justin Herbert. Moving on to our number 6, to close out the A tier, we have Josh Allen. If you have Josh Allen on your team, you pretty much just have to start him. I understand he's coming off of a game in which he had 14.38 fantasy points, 2 interceptions, and a fumble accompanied by that. 3 overall turnovers against Denver in week 10. And then if you go back to the last time he took on the Jets, who he has the privilege of taking on this week, in week 1 against the Jets, had 4 turnovers in that game. There is a possibility where we could have another lackluster performance from Josh Allen. Hopefully the offensive coordinator change is going to potentially elevate his play. But, thus far this season, the New York Jets have really made it a tough time for quarterbacks, especially elite quarterbacks. Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, and Justin Herbert, they've all struggled against the New York Jets defense. My expectation potentially is him struggling. We just have to hope that he continues his streak of 7 rushing touchdowns in the last 8 games, maybe gets even more rushing utilization to solidify his performance within the given week. Moving on to our number 7, playing tonight, we have Joe Burrow. In the last 5 consecutive games, Joe Burrow has had 2 or more passing touchdowns. I know that he doesn't have T. Higgins available tonight. I know this is a short week. I know that the last time he took on the Baltimore Ravens in week 2, he was playing on one leg, yet despite that, had himself 222 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, and 15.38 fantasy points. I'm expecting a healthy Joe Burrow, who's obviously coming off of a loss. So are the Baltimore Ravens. Somebody's got to get right. Hopefully both these teams in a high-scoring contest. I know that Thursday night football games have been relatively low-scoring, but hopefully we can get a shootout between these two teams, and Joe Burrow can find the upside there. Moving on to our number 8, we have Joshua Dobbs. That is correct. Joshua Dobbs has earned a top 8 ranking within a given week, especially taking on the Denver Broncos this week. In the last 2 games, Joshua Dobbs has been able to eclipse 24.92 fantasy points in both games. As long as he continues to dominate through the air, the potential of Justin Jefferson returning this week only helps him. Even if he doesn't, he'll have KJ Osborne at least back this week, which only continues to solidify the receiving core of the Minnesota Vikings. Really, he only just throws the ball to TJ Hockenson, so it doesn't matter that much. But he's also been able to get himself a lot of rushing utilization. In each of the last 4 games that Joshua Dobbs has played, he scored a rushing touchdown. So my expectation going forward is another big week here against the Denver Broncos. Moving on to our number 9, the thumbnail of today's episode, CJ Stroud, rookie quarterback of the Houston Texans. In comparison to all other quarterbacks in a 4-point per passing touchdown league, he is number 5 in terms of fantasy points per game on average. Now, obviously, the game in which he scored 50 fantasy points definitely does skew some things there. 470 passing yards, 5 passing touchdowns. But nonetheless, he's coming off a performance of 19.04 last week. He has the privilege of taking on the Arizona Cardinals defense. Again, it's not the most, disadvantageous matchup. I think this is a middle-of-the-pack matchup where he absolutely can dominate against. Of course, Noah Brown missing the last 2 days of practice. That's been a huge receiving threat within that offense with over 150 receiving yards in each of the last 2 games. That could play an overall impact. But going into this week and every other week for the remainder of the season, it's just going to be a matter of, do they allow CJ Stroud to throw the ball for the majority of the game? Each of the last 2 games, over 39 passing attempts. In games this season in which CJ Stroud has been able to eclipse 280 plus passing yards, they have a 4-1 win-loss record. They got to let this man throw the ball. And if and when they do, against the Arizona Cardinals, should have a dominant performance. Moving on to our number 10, we have Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy coming off of the bye week, an incredible performance of nearly 24 fantasy points, 296 through the air, 3 passing touchdowns, and only had himself 26 total passing attempts, yet a 73% passing completion percentage. Of course, with Deebo Samuel back, with Trent Williams back, the 49ers' lifeblood is now back. Those are the 2 guys coming out of the tunnel with the boombox and obviously leading the charge. Those are the primary leaders of that offense. And going forward, of course, with those guys back, Brock Purdy is only going to improve. Thus far this season, with a full healthy offense around him, with Ayuk, with Deebo Samuel, with Trent Williams, he's averaging 20.51 fantasy points per game, a 72% passing completion percentage, and has thrown 0 interceptions in games in which they have been healthy. Taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the second most advantageous matchup of the week, allowing over 19 fantasy points per game. I think Brock Purdy at number 10 could very easily be surpassed. He could be a top 5 quarterback within the given week. I'm just expecting more rushing touchdowns, specifically going in the direction of Christian McCaffrey that could end up limiting Brock Purdy's upside. Moving on to our number 11, we have Lamar Jackson. I understand that Lamar Jackson as of late has been very inconsistent, but you have to understand that it's not a matter of the offense being inconsistent. This offense has scored 9 rushing touchdowns from their running backs in the last 4 games. When you have that much upside from your running backs, there's always an opportunity for Lamar Jackson to potentially get himself utilization on the goal line and score a rushing touchdown himself, which is only going to elevate his play. I'm hoping tonight against Cincinnati Bengals, we can see a very similar performance in which he went ahead and conducted earlier this season in week 2 against Cincinnati, in which they won 27-24 in that game, 273 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, a boatload of rushing upside, and of course, nearly 23 fantasy points. We're hoping for that. I understand it's a short week. I understand that his left tackle is going to be out, and I understand he's coming off a very poor performance against an elite defense, but I can assure you the Cincinnati Bengals, they don't got an elite defense as of late. Moving on to our number 12 to close out the kind of top 12 conversation, we have Jared Goff coming off of a performance of 333 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns. They take on the Chicago Bears this week. If in fact the Chicago Bears defense is going to continue to play as well as they have, I mean, they're allowing 2.6 yards per carry on average since week 5 to opposing running back. If that's going to be the case, if that's going to continue, the play style of this offense may have to shift. They may not want to abandon the running game, but if it does not find immediate success, they'll have to throw the ball. The Chicago Bears are allowing the 11th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. My expectation would be Jared Goff, of course, having himself another solid game of potentially 250, 270 passing yards, potentially 2 passing touchdowns. That'd be a solid week, and hopefully that comes to fruition. Moving on to our number 13, we have Justin Fields. I don't know exactly how the thumb injury is going to impact Justin Fields. I'm not a doctor. I don't know what his rehab process and or the progression that he's had over the course of the last couple weeks really looks like. But I know that the last time we saw Justin Fields, he put up 32.98 and 27.9 fantasy points. He had 8 passing touchdowns in the last 2 healthy games he played. And he takes on the Detroit Lions. This is going to be a negative game script, and this is going to be a matter of Justin Fields trying to dig his team out of a bad spot and hopefully running the ball, throwing the ball for majority of the second half, and finding fantasy upside in those circumstances. Moving on to our number 14, we have Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray looked great in his overall debut. 17.26 fantasy points. On top of the fact that Clayton Tune came into the game on the 1-yard line for a brotherly shove steal for a touchdown. If in fact they gave that opportunity to Kyler Murray, could have very easily had himself 23 plus fantasy points within the game. Unfortunately, that was not the case. They obviously want to conserve Kyler Murray. They don't want to go ahead and throw a smaller quarterback into the bottom of one of those piles. They just don't want to take any risks in that overall circumstance. But hopefully they'll feel more comfortable going forward. This week they take on the Houston Texans. I'm expecting a good performance here. This could very easily be a high-scoring game between these two teams. And as long as Kyler Murray continues to have his rushing upside, especially down near the goal line, of course, he's a fantastic play. Moving on to our number 15, we have Sam Howell. Sam Howell wasn't, fantastic last week, but luckily was able to complete a couple passing touchdowns to Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson. Still had himself over 300 passing yards, primarily because of the fact that Brian Robinson had 119 of those receiving yards. That's going to be a rare circumstance, but nonetheless, they take on the New York Giants earlier this season against the Giants. And that defensive coordinator really did force Sam Howell to struggle. I'm worried that they're going to be in a very similar situation if that does take place. Of course, expect less from Sam Howell this week. If he continues to play as well as he normally has, he should probably be in that top 12 conversation within the given week. Moving on to the final quarterback I wanted to mention, Geno Smith had himself a huge bounce back performance, which is fantastic. 300 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, 0 interceptions. That was a rarity as of late. But going forward, it's just going to purely be a matter of, can Geno Smith keep it up? You take on the Los Angeles Rams. This is going to be a competitive game. If he can go ahead and just continue to send the ball in the direction of his primary receiving threats of DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, they're going to find success. Outside of that, the rest will take care of itself. All right, guys, that's going to cover for me today in terms of my tight end and quarterback rankings. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Again, we're going to go ahead and now transition into talking about a couple pick'em slips before closing out today's video. Real quick and easy. Check out Underdog Fantasy. Use code Andrew and make that first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only to get my rankings, not only to be able to take advantage of the play of 0.5 total yards of Joe Burrow tonight, but of course, potentially draft some teams and have some fun with these games. Okay, let's go ahead and check that out right now. All right, so going into tonight's game, if in fact you can't take advantage of the 0.5 total yards from Joe Burrow, I do like the idea of 1.5 passing touchdowns going higher. Like I mentioned earlier on in today's episode, Joe Burrow has had 2 passing touchdowns or more in each of the last 5 games he's played within this offense since he has gotten healthy. I'm expecting Joe Burrow to light it up against the Baltimore Ravens defense, which has played well over the course of the season, but as of late, of course, dealing with injuries in their secondary, Joe Burrow should be able to take advantage of that, even in the absence of T. Higgins. Now, another one of these sneaky plays that I thought about suggesting, but I'll just go ahead and I'll be patient with it. Tanner Hudson has been able to surpass this number of 20.5 receiving yards in each of the last 2 games. He plays a lot of overall offensive snaps within this team, along with Irv Smith, but he has been the primary receiving tight end of this offense over the course of the last 2 games. So keep an eye on Tanner Hudson and his potential. You might want to go ahead and throw another slip in there, but if you want to go ahead and complete the slip in regards to at least getting one play in from both teams, I would look in the direction of either Lamar Jackson or Mark Andrews. In regards to Lamar Jackson, what I really do like is either higher than 8.5 rushing attempts and or higher than 18.5 passing completions. One way or the other, Lamar Jackson is going to have himself a solid game. Whether he scores touchdowns or not, that is one of the most difficult things to predict, especially with Lamar Jackson, who has been very much so touchdown deficient in terms of rushing and passing. So as of right now, it would be one of these 2 overall numbers. But if I go ahead and I want to trust the overall player within the Baltimore Ravens offense, I'm going to lean upon Mark Andrews. Again, like I've mentioned before, the Cincinnati Bengals have allowed a lot of fantasy points to opposing tight ends as of late. I feel like this could be a Mark Andrews kind of receiving touchdown game. I honestly think that that could be the case. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lean towards his receiving yard total. We're going to hope that we don't get hooked in that overall circumstance. But that's my 2 plays. Joe Burrow, 1.5 passing touchdowns. Mark Andrews going higher on his overall receiving yards. Again, I like Tanner Hudson. I like Lamar Jackson. I'll probably go ahead and put together a couple slips there. But these are the 2 that I'm going to suggest for tonight's game. There are a lot of other plays for tonight's game. If you guys are interested, of course, check out Underdog Fantasy today. Take advantage of the opportunity. And until tomorrow, which we'll have rest of season rankings, thank you everybody for watching. And I'll see you guys. Peace.